Table Talk is not your typical D&D TTRPG podcast. We are not here to run you through our whole campaign.
We're here to talk about everything else in the space of tabletop roleplay.
I'm your host, Alejandra Wilhelm.
And I'm also your host, Mariah Gresham.
And we're your tabletop roleplay girlies. Alrighty, and we are live with another episode of Table Talk. Thank you so much for joining us yet again. It's just your girls, just me and Mariah. And today we wanted to actually cover a subject we're a little familiar about, but also have some other interesting takes on. Mariah, you want to let them know what we're talking about today?
Yes. So I was trolling on Reddit, as I do, the gold mine for all good discussion topics. And it came up, someone, as like a subset of another post, someone brought up how some, like, as DMs, we can have a tendency to favor certain PCs, like either playing favorites or giving one person too much screen time, whatever. And I was like, ooh, that would be an interesting thing to discuss because we have examples of, we were in a past campaign where that happened with another player. And then I know we both are concerned about not doing that in our own games that we run.
100%.
So I thought it would be a fun little thing because it was pitched as like, oh, this is just a thing DMs do. And I'm like, well, it shouldn't be. So it would be fun to talk about it from the standpoint of avoiding it as a DM, but also if you're a player and you feel like someone is being favored.
Or even if you're getting favoritism and you're noticing it. Again, it may not be intentional at times. But yeah, like you said, we've had a little experience from a player standpoint at a table previously. We've referenced this game before. We never mentioned names, but it was a situation where one of the players, specifically, one was new to D&D and came in with a character that they had since they were young and like role played and wrote apparently about this character. So we've made some mentions that they also had issues with like dealing with the fact that in a game like D&D or TTRPGs in general, like your character that is supposedly good at certain things can and will fail at the things that they are supposed to be good at. And they had a bit of a time contending with that.
Which can be like, I can have a certain amount of empathy for that because like if you have a very clear idea of who this person is in your head and then the dice are like, hey, every time you go to punch someone and you're a monk, you're gonna whiff it. Yeah. Like that's hard and that's frustrating. And I think it's also why like we've talked about this before and like I know I've talked to a bunch of like friends of ours where I'm like, caution against going in with like a super strong idea or anything that you are not even a super strong idea, but a character concept that is very fleshed out and that you are very emotionally attached to. Like you have to kind of hold that in a loose hand because the dice and the unpredictability of like the medium are going to dictate a lot of your character.
We have all sat at a table with a character that we've played for a while and been like, yeah, I am a rogue. I am good at sneaking, killing, and hiding.
I got one skill. That's it.
Yeah, I got proficiency in a few skills and it's these 3. Yeah. And then been like, by God, do the dice hate me? And I'm rolling nothing higher than a 2 for the entirety of the session. Yeah. For that particular day. It's
like the time when like Val got captured.
Yeah. Val's bad day, for real.
Val's no good, very bad day.
No good, very bad day. I'm literally trying to hide and sneak and attack and I'm whiffing everything that she has been built for. Yeah.
Just here comes that 4-armed lizard man.
Here comes that 4-armed lizard man about to milli rock my shit in this bush. But it is something that like it happens because it's a game of chance. And sometimes the dice fucking hate you. And
sometimes they do. Sometimes the dice don't want something to happen, even though you really desperately do.
But yeah, and so like I like you said, I have empathy for that. Yeah. But the way that it would have like play out at the specific table
would be, I mean, so we've mentioned, this table a lot. We've referenced it. It was like one of our first 4 episodes. We were like, how to leave a toxic table that we talk about from experience. Is the table we talk about. Our lived experience, right? And so, I mean, like this horse is very dead and well beaten. We're playing xylophones on the skeleton at this point because it's like that shit's been bad. But it was a thing where it wasn't just like a once or twice, or like, oh, someone's like having a particularly bad day where you're frustrated, and so like the DM kind of throw them a bone. It was everything.
Yeah.
And it was like anything that character or this player would want her character to do, if it wouldn't go her way, then
it was like,
it was a problem.
Yeah, it was like the
halt the presses.
She stopped enjoying the game. She would like start being on her phone for the rest of the session.
Yeah.
And she like would visibly check out.
Yes.
Until something happened in game that piqued her interest that maybe meant her character could be in the spotlight again.
Right.
And it was, yeah, to say the least, a little bit annoying.
Yeah, it was frustrating because I very much feel like you were at the whim of like one person's attitude.
Yeah.
About it, which is not fun in any respect as just like a friend doing we could be playing Scrabble and that would still be fucking annoying. But especially in a game where it's like, hey, we're supposed to be doing this collaboratively. Mm-hmm. When someone like visibly gets like, I've certainly had games where like I've gotten frustrated because I'm rolling really bad and I don't completely check out, but I get a little bit where I'm like, yeah, like to hell with it, you know, but I'm still in the game. I'm not just completely removing myself because things aren't going my way.
Exactly.
I'm still like participating. Like no one expects you to be like happy if you go try to like romance someone and you roll like 6 nat ones.
Yeah.
And you know, it's just a bad time.
And I will say in the beginning, at the very least, like that DM is very knowledgeable about the rules, and whenever they would try to finesse things a little bit to their favor because they were just mad that they rolled a 1, they would be like, well, I mean, this is what you rolled. Like, this is what's going to happen. But then later on, because of the fact of like the attitude that this player had about their own like character failures was affecting how engaged they were in the game. Like you said, the DM started trying to like throw them a bone once in a while and things like that.
And then it became all they do is throw them bones.
All they do is throw the bones.
And that doesn't happen with the other players at the table. And it's also like that player and the DM were in a relationship.
Yeah, they got into a relationship at some point in the campaign.
Yeah. Which, like, again, like, is not inherently a problem, but it adds another weird
dynamic at the table.
Dynamic and, like, layer of, interpersonal power and things like that. I mean, there were a lot of weird layers of interpersonal power.
Yeah, that we don't have time to even get into.
That are so far beyond the scope of this podcast. It's absolutely wild. But that definitely is kind of thinking like, oh, well, my partner is going to be mad if they don't get their way.
Exactly.
So I'm just going to make my home life easier. And it's like, that's incredibly unhealthy.
Yeah, 100%.
Just as a pause for a moment, as a war of like, yeah, anything, which like feels obvious to say, but then again, sometimes you'd be learning that shit in the game, where it's like, hey, if you have to completely capitulate to someone's desires to have them not
make your life miserable
because that's probably not a relationship, whether it's romantic, friend, or family, that you should continue to indulge.
100%. And mind you, like, there's plenty of people that like are in relationships with their DMs,
and it's totally fine. That's not dating your DM is not the problem.
No, it's the
totally
dynamic
fine.
between the two people at the table and how it affects others.
Yep.
But yeah, like I remember one scenario, again, like to stipulate red flags of this table. It was like a kink-based campaign in Ravenloft.
Yeah.
Yeah, which the writing was on the wall before we even begun.
Yeah, the writing was in Margaritaville neon. It was
Margaritaville neon.
And we were like, oh my God, crazy.
Yeah, there was a dynamic of romancing NPCs and, rolling to seduce, and like we never got too crazy explicit or anything, but we'd roll to see like, oh, how satisfied were they? There were like bonuses you got if you like managed to satisfy your partner in bed and vice versa and things and whatever. And so this player, by God, could they not romance anybody?
Historically only rolled ones when they were rolling to seduce one. And part of like this character, as with like most of us, I will say, of like, we want our characters to be a suave and savant,
want them
and
to be suave and sexy, and she's an attractive person.
Yeah, and you're just face planting.
Yeah,
every time you try,
whiffing,
which is objectively very frustrating.
Yeah, I can 100%.
I would get frustrated for her, where I'm like, wow, I wish she could at least roll like an 8.
Yeah,
would be something.
Yeah,
because all she rolls is ones.
Yeah. And like on the other side of the coin, there was me, who my DM could not even fathom the concept of a Warforged romancing someone.
Yeah, which like is
I'll die on my hill there.
That's so just strange. Like, first of all, there are so many story canons like Mass Effect.
Yeah.
In this post Mass Effect world.
In this post Mass Effect era, in the year of our Lord. Are you telling me robots can't fuck?
Because we would joke. I was like, you would just send him a binder of fan fiction that can prove otherwise.
What do you need to wrap your little noodle around it, my God? I have so many references.
What reference material?
I got what you need. You need videos.
I can draw you a diagram. Yeah. I can like
we try and like we would all try so hard. We're like, what do you need to make this happen? Like, does Cadence need to have accessories? Like,
I mean, yeah,
whatever.
Does she need to go visit the shop? And
like she can have interchangeable parts and whatever. And like, but he just couldn't get his head. And at some point he tried to throw me a bone and like, here's another cyborg man, but they still just had like this very wholesome interaction. And I'm like, there's no intimacy again in a kink campaign. I'm being treated like the little baby doll that everyone protects.
You were kind of forcibly put into playing an ace character, which like nothing wrong with that. Like, I'm demisexual, like I'm on that spectrum. But it was not when we
started that game.
It was not the idea or the concept. It didn't really fit with that game, and also it was not a choice you made for your character. It was something that you assumed would be an element, and then you kind of got you did get pigeonholed into that being a really integral aspect of your character. Yeah, when that wasn't
something I intended for
or agreed to, and there was never a point where it was like a conversation. Yeah, where like, hey, like, it's kind of going this way. Like, is this cool? Is this like? No, that was just...
And it progressed to a point where it was like, okay, like, now I'm here, and it feels weird to sexualize Cadence now.
Yeah, now it feels like fetishizing, right? Because she's been treated...
Or have her engage in any of that, because it's so air quotes, out of character at this point, because it's been played into. Yeah. But with that person, specifically, like, kind of, other end of the scenario where she wanted to, but she was just whiffing those roles. Yeah. At one point we had, defeated one of the dread lords, and we're in like kind of downtime figuring out how we progress our characters and level up and things like that. And they had discussed prior a whole scene where she breaks off from the group, goes into another domain by herself,
gets through the mist,
fine.
Which wild. We had to like tie ourselves together with hemp rope and pray to get through. Like,
and she just flies through with her little coat of bats or whatever the fuck.
Not a mistwalker. Doesn't have
just makes it over to this other domain. Meets this person that like, how do you know this person? How did you know to find this person?
And it was somebody from that character's backstory that like she had already written, which like I try to be as fair as I can, right? So it's like I will acknowledge of like, in our Strixhaven campaigns, like we brainstorm and all of us brainstorm scenes with 100%. You of like, there's tons of things I pitch where I'm like, oh, this would be cute, or this would be dramatic, or this would be funny. But it's always with the caveat of like, hey, we can either just maladaptive daydream about this, or if it doesn't actually fit into the campaign, I will write it as fan fiction or write it into a novel. Yeah. Like, it's never me anyone being like, hey, this has to happen.
Yeah. My thing is this, though. Again, with the context of the game, we were all yoinked from our respective, like...
And couldn't leave.
Worlds and could not leave.
Right.
How do you already have an existing relationship in one of these dread domains?
Exactly.
And to a secret organization of monster hunters, because she was taking blood. What is it?
Blood hunter.
Blood hunter was her level. So it's like how you develop these connections, manage to find them, crossed the mist, all of this to get there, and then without having any need for any seduction roles whatsoever. They engage in the coitus, the devil's tango. And even then she still rolled like shit, and she still
rolled bad. She still rolled like a 5.
Oh, it was wow. I'm like, damn, you had him basically hand you a pre-approved.
I was like, at this point, just head on down to the convent. Like, that's just that's not for this character.
And you still failed to satisfy. And he was like, well, he satisfied you. And she was like,
She's like, that's not better.
Not
That
better.
doesn't make me feel better.
Because if any femme presenting person knows when you're with a masked person, if
God.
you didn't satisfy them, it's an insult.
Yeah, I mean, it's an insult to me anyway. I don't care. I'm like, I will take that personally.
But she was just so frustrated. But again, it's one of those situations where like the disparity between her being frustrated she's not getting to bang somebody and he hands her one on a silver platter, me getting frustrated I'm not getting to bang somebody and I'm just shoved in my little corner and given
sorry, go chain chomp through some ivies. Like, too bad for you. It is
wild, absolutely wild. And it was a very clear example of like favoritism that started even prior to them being in like a formal relationship.
Yes. And this was also, a lot of the things that were unhealthy in that campaign stemmed from unhealthy dynamics away from the table.
Yes.
Right? So it wasn't like, oh, these things just came freshly formed out of the void and only affected the D&D game. Like, no, like our dynamics were inherently unhealthy. And so that bled into D&D because it's going to. But yeah, it was also a thing where, because I remember I tried to have like one conversation with that DM where I was like, hey, I think it was maybe after that event where like because we had a discussion about it and I'm like, yeah, it might be worth saying something at this point. And I'm like, hey, like, do you see anything weird about this? About the, like, here's kind of how I'm viewing it. Like, how does that land with you? Does that land as fair? Do you think that sometimes like this person might get a little bit more special treatment or leeway that other players don't get? And DM was like, no, I don't feel that way at all. I'm like, cool. And Matt, I was like, great, this is going nowhere. And then I didn't say anything ever again. Which, is that the correct response? And I said, nope. But we live and we learn, and I wouldn't do it again. But
no, correction. You should do it again. But the correct response from the DM is not to be like, no, I don't see it. It's like, tell me why you're seeing that. Because if someone at your table is noticing something, it may be a mindset for other players. It might,
for sure.
Because like, again, you can have like blindness from behind the screen.
Oh, absolutely.
And you're perceiving that it's going a certain way, and it might not be getting perceived that way by some of the players at the table.
Which I should clarify, when I said like I wouldn't do it again, I meant I wouldn't just like have no spine and back away and not address that again. Because I was like, in that dynamic, I was like, it is easier. I was like, I have addressed this to the extent that I feel comfortable and like emotionally safe addressing it. And anything further is just going to dump more drama and animosity on my head, and I don't have the bandwidth to deal with that. So
to
I
be
was
fair,
like,
that was like stepping through landmines half the time. So.
Yeah, we were absolutely. So I was like, I took a shot at seeing it and it didn't work at all.
Yeah,
and that was all I can do. And I was like, cool. This is just another aspect of like what this is going to be, which is like in one of our very early episodes of like when things like that especially start happening. It's like, okay, if people aren't willing to like hear you out and accept that like there might be a different viewpoint or that someone might be interpreting something differently, or be open-minded to like discuss and integrate everybody's kind of ideas and opinions, whether it's a DM, whether it's a player, whether it's someone that's not D&D related at all, like that's something where you have to step back and you have to reconsider that situation as a whole and be like, is this healthy and good and fun for me, or is this not anymore? But yeah, I think like that was definitely a lot of the way that we run games. I feel like, I mean, everyone is informed by their past experiences, but I feel like us kind of being in that Crucible-esque situation, we are then a bit hyper conscious of not wanting to repeat those mistakes. Also because like we play with our best friends, right? So like we value those relationships. We don't, it is, nothing is worth like messing that up. So I think we like are extra of like, oh, am I? So we were just talking about this when we were brainstorming topics to record, like how we get kind of anxious sometimes by like giving one character too much spotlight, or it's like, are everyone's scenes having equal impact, or is everyone not even equal impact, but like are each of the players feeling like good and seen and equally good and seen, validated in their scene?
Yeah. And like I wanted to make the point on the episode that like sometimes that favoritism is not necessarily like one conscious favoritism
Yeah,
or
absolutely.
malicious at all.
No. Yeah.
Because like you said, like I think we're hyper aware of trying to not repeat those mistakes or be too favorable to one player versus, or like allowing something for one person versus the other.
Yep.
But like, I referenced like my campaign that I DM specifically, especially because it's the first game I've ever DM'd. So there's a lot of like points of learning that I'm doing live.
We're still both quite new.
To it. And, like I noticed that, for example, there's like because my players are you, Bex, and Alyssa.
Mm-hmm. And mine are the same. I run and Ollie plays.
And, there's definitely bits of like, there was more for me to kind of like dig my teeth into with your character and Callista's. And Jack was still like, Alyssa's character was still kind of forming.
It was
like,
nebulous.
It was a little more nebulous, has like some ties and some backstory and things like that. But there was just a little bit more left out in the open that I hadn't quite grasped like how to integrate it yet. I'm starting to now because of like the way that our game has developed. Now I'm like figuring out how to kind of dig myself deeper into Jack's character. But I did notice within myself, like as we would play, that especially because like the first arc that we had was yours,
mine,
and then the one directly after is Callista's.
Because I handed you basically a fully formed prequel novella, and I'm like, here you go, please.
And I was like, cool, me. I got much runway on this. I really could pick a direction and sprint.
Yep.
And it was good. It was comfortable, and it like helped me kind of wet my toes a little bit and figure out what I was going to do and how my style was going to develop and things like that. And we have very much a format of like vignettes individually and together with each player as like kind of the format of how our sessions go. And so there was a point where I was starting to feel like, maybe yours and Callista's scenes individually had a little bit more like depth or impact than Jack's. And I was starting to like become aware of that. And it was like genuinely bothering, whether it gets perceived at the table or not.
No,
this is me
I have the same
being hypercritical of myself, maybe. But I started noticing that, and it wasn't because of like necessarily like I love your characters more than Jack. I adore Jack.
They're all so great.
And Jack has been the result of so much good shit in our games because they just make such cool decisions.
Yes.
And
there's a wild Jack's a wild
Jack
card
is a wild card character.
Jack is a sociopath and a wild card.
Keeps it so interesting.
Like, you never know.
And like it's taken me a bit because I've had to see Jack in play, basically.
Yeah.
And now that I've gotten like more comfortable in seeing like Jack's personality come out, because like there's also moments where like Jack's had a little bit of like a reveal of like who he actually is. And I'm like, that was also new to me, like seeing it live. And I'm like, okay, now I've fully grasped who this character is.
And a lot of those things like have inherently they come out in game with like TTRPGs, but like especially with Jack of like, it's been very much like peeling away the layers.
Yes.
And those layers have only really peeled in situations that have come up in game. And so like it's been a collective discovery.
Yes.
Which is really cool. And I think like the fact of like how we kind of format vignettes and we kind of format of like loosely, like the first year at Strixhaven was Anya's arc, and the second year is Callista's arc, the third will be Jack's, and the fourth will be the culmination of kind of all of them and us like solidifying as a party.
Yeah.
But like that's nice because it gives you and Alyssa as like Jack's player like time and leeway to really let Jack form in a way that feels authentic and to not have to like force anything. It's kind of similar with like Callista's like very complicated family dynamics. Like we kind of needed that first year of getting little peaks and
getting a little
kind
more
of seeing
established,
to really like if you would have had to jump into that one first, like it still would have been great. But you would have had a little bit less information than you do now. And I think like some of the richness and some of that would have been lost. And like I have a similar thing with VTM where like your character Revna has a pretty present problem and a pretty like her. I haven't fully determined whose stuff is going to pop off first, because it very much depends on like how y'all react to other NPCs and other like powers that are in the game. But like Revan's character, and then Bex is playing a new character now, which she's also pretty primed. She has some immediate problems. And then I love Alyssa's little Nepo baby characters.
Yeah.
They bring me so much joy and entertainment and love. And it's like Alyssa's character, Nox, in VTM is similar. Like, Nox lives a pretty comfortable life, and he has a very good relationship with his sire. And, like, he teaches at, like, a school, and it's just, like, he's having a chill time on life. Like, it's gone exceedingly well for him, like, which is not true of the other two player characters. And so that's fun to play with, as, like, a nice little comical sitcom breaks. But then also, like, I have some ideas of, like, how things are going to start pinching for Nox, or, like, things are going to become more apparent. Also, like, Nox is a Zamitzi, which is, like, why when Alyssa asked me to recommend kind of clans for her, Zamitzi was my top pick, because I love them. I think they're super cool. And they also come preloaded with, like, a lot of baggage and trauma and creepiness.
Gift wrapped.
Yeah. And I wanted a little bit of a horror element in the game. And I was like, what better way to integrate that than flush crafting? Like, who doesn't love
Try flush crafting.
Yeah. When in doubt, try flush crafting. Turn your arm into a sword and then turn it back to a hand. So, like, that will be fun to start kind of shattering the illusion, or adding a bit of deep perspective of, like, this life that Nox has enjoyed. Like, how is that coming to be? Like, how is that? It's really that kind of, like, Nox is like a kid of, like, a mafia don, and it's like, things are just great, and, like, he runs, the deli downstairs, and it's like, no, he doesn't. Like,
no, he does not.
This life that you've enjoyed.
He has, in fact, been chopping people through that slicer. To prove a point.
1000%. And so it's like, that's going to be really interesting to see, like, to what level is Nox, like, down for that, and to what level is Nox, like, brother, like, this is not what we are.
I don't want to get my hands dirty.
Yeah, like, this is not very cash money if I not sign on to this. And so I'm very excited to see how, like, as those characters hit their stride, how all of that plays out. And eventually, I think after I move, we'll be able to play, like, Strixhaven, and then, like, every other weekend we'll switch between your campaign and mine, which will be fantastic, because they were both DMing once a month, but we get
beautiful.
Yeah, we get our little our regular hits of character.
Yeah, but it is one thing too, also, like, and I think we touched a little bit on, like, last episode, we were talking about, like, building character arcs and things like that, where, like, there's also, like, the very careful balance of, and I think we've also talked about this with the Gals and Goblins episode, where they're like, no, like, a good skill is knowing when it's, like, someone else's turn to shine. Like, if it's their arc, like, making sure that there's, like, emphasis and highlight on them. Your characters can still play a part and, like, be involved and things like that. So.
Everybody has their subplots. Everybody has interesting stuff going on all the time. But it's like, and it's also that hinges on, like, making sure everyone gets their turn in the light only works if everyone really does get their turn in the light, right? And so that's where, like, the favoritism piece comes in, where, like, you have to kind of build that structure out where you as the DM, and then also all of your players, know of, like, okay, everyone's going to get their turn, quote unquote, on, like, a micro level in a session and on a macro level with, like, driving the big plot. And as long as, like, when you have that, at least for us, like, it allows all of us to really fangirl over everyone else's arcs and be equally or more invested in what's going on with, like, the quote unquote main character and story. Yeah, as we are with our own.
Yeah. Because it's definitely something that, like, I wanted to be very conscious of, because, like, I think of it as it's, like, varying degrees that I'm graduating through. Like, Anya's arc was very comfortable for me, because I was like, I knew exactly what was going on, and I knew exactly what strings to pull. And it was, in all honesty, very good for me as, like, a starting, like, DM to go on that arc first, because it was the most comfortable.
That's kind of why I wanted to give, like, when we were brainstorming for Anya, it took me forever to come up with Anya, because I was so, like, jaded from the past campaign. But then, like, once I hit the idea and I was like, okay, there's something here. And then, like, I did want, like, as it started to hit momentum, I was like, oh, this could be a really good way for me and to get a foothold in a new campaign, and for also you to get a foothold in running a new campaign, because all the ideas were just hitting.
Yeah.
So it was like, oh, this is like going to be an immediate problem.
Yeah. And it was good. But then like I had to be very conscious of when we were doing the transition over to Callista's arc. Because like your character is still very much involved in Callista's family stuff because of like your character's relationship to her brother. So there are like, that's a lot of our vignettes is you dealing with that interconnection, because right now it is the thing that's highlighted most in Callista's arc is the arranged marriages, and like Callista's currently going through that. Callista is currently courting Amy to be engaged, and that's a lot of like the plays that we're working on. So I have to be conscious and aware, like when scenes with you and Narian happen, that they're good additions to the other stuff that's going on, but it's not necessarily like overshadowing or veering focus off of her. Yeah.
Which I've had though, like I've thought about that too as a player, because again, like trying not wanting to be the problem. And it's a thing where it's like Bex and Alyssa ship Anya and Narian
just as hard
more than I do. Like I've written Anya and Narian fan fiction, especially for Alyssa, and I put it in there. I was like, tag her.
Come get your food.
I'm like, literally, come get your food. It's hot and ready. It is hot to go. But yeah, it is that thing where like you don't want to feel like you're usurping the spotlight all the time.
Yeah, but it's also it's a careful balance you have to make, because it's like, yes, it's their arc, but you want the other players engaged too.
Yeah, you can't it can't all focus on one person and then the other people's like, because the other characters still have stuff going on, even if they're
100%.
not part of the, whatever is majorly arcing and falling apart at the moment. Like other people still have stuff going on. I think Strixhaven inherently is good for that, because we have like the classes and the clubs and so it's like our sessions are kind of split between like class week and like after school activities, and then like clubs and work and weekends, and then we'll have breaks like when things start heating up for things that are just plot progression. And so that helps with there's a bit more of a structure of like, okay, everyone's certainly we're gonna see what everyone is doing, almost like it's a sitcom that we're like checking in, the camera's panning to different
characters, and then y'all all convene and like do something together. It's been interesting to find that balance, and some days I think I do better than others, but it's been a good learning experience for me to feel out that transition from your arc to hers, and like making sure that we're not veering too much focus off of her to address like older like stuff from your arc, but still like it's still present, it still has an effect, and I don't want to diminish that. And then also like focusing on it's interesting to go through it and then like start breadcrumbing the stuff for Jack like periodically, because eventually we will transition to Jack's arc. And the way that it's naturally progressed, because again, I think like on a comfort level as a DM, the things that I was most confident in tackling, like your arc was the one I was most comfortable going like head into, and I'm glad it worked out that way. And it gave me time to get comfy and cozy in my place as the person running the game. And I've talked about like how difficult it is for me to play bad guys because of the discomfort that naturally happens with that.
You don't want to like hurt your friends.
No.
Because you're not a bad person.
No. I'm a recovering people pleaser. And when I'm getting negative feedback from your facial expressions, it's hard to go further.
Even though like we all like want it, but there is also like the Bloodstones are an abusive family.
Yeah, the Bloodstones are an abusive family.
And so like there was a moment in the last session we played where like things have been like super chill and comfy cozy with the Bloodstones, and I'm like, that makes me nervous because like I'm inherently anxious and also a recovering people pleaser. So I'm like, the axe is gonna fall soon. And then there was that like end moment where like Urias like went at Callista. And like you play it well, and so like there is a physical, visceral reaction to that, and even like me not even being in the scene of I'm like, oh no, I forgot that this family is a mess.
I had to pull out like my mom voice in it, and like raise the octave, but it's definitely taken me a bit to do that, and like there was like definitely elements of the our transitionary like ball and whatever, and I was like, damn, I really did forget to play unlikable characters during that ball.
It was honestly
or like
kind of great.
Stir the pot a little bit, or
everyone was lovely. We
yeah.
just made new friends.
But
we fucked it up on our own. It's fine.
Oh, you're good. Yeah,
we'll mess it up.
But it was something that I was like, damn, I forgot to like play antagonistic
like
characters.
Toxic.
Yeah, because I was just having a fun time being at a ball with my girls, basically, and just playing every other bitch that was there.
Every flavor of himbo. And
and
fun gal pal.
You know, there's things that like, you know, Callista's like bitch sister hasn't like really made an appearance yet.
Yeah, she made an appearance last session too.
Yeah,
it was like,
and so there were little notes I was taking that I was like, okay, I need to like really get in the headspace because we're going to be diving into that like unlikable family dynamic.
We're getting into it.
And so I need to like prepare myself for those things. And yeah, like having them happen and having them work, I was like, oh, thank God. And I'm getting more comfortable. So I think the way that our character arcs have progressed has allowed me to grow in time and get more comfy and cozy and doing things like that. And then I feel like by the time that I get to Jack's stuff, I'll be like, one, it's given me time to develop those skills, figure out like Jack as a character, and start like as our stories unravel. Because honestly, a lot of the times I'm making those decisions real time.
1000%.
And like I'll have the vaguest semblance of an idea of what your character arc is, but then so many other things get piled on because of your decisions.
Yeah, and because of the roles.
Yeah, and so like, you know, a lot of Callista's stuff started panning out once like we were really in the nitty gritty of your stuff.
Yep.
And so on and so forth. And so like Jax is very much doing the same for me right now because like Callista's eventually feeds into Jack's stuff.
Yeah, because like Callista's family's involved in a lot of the political machinations and stuff that will feed into Jack. So it's like we're zooming out kind of gradually of like Anya's arc was immediately the most personal. Like there are bigger, wider scale pieces that are still working and I'm sure connected to a bunch of other things that will, you know, untangle with time. But Callista's family is like has a lot more influence, so the scope zoomed out. And then Jack is like from a different continent and has a whole clan, and so like that's going to zoom out a lot.
Yeah, we've been expanding that, and like it's been a time to go through that growth while also being mindful of that like favoritism or not trying to be, and like trying to make sure each character is having their moment in the light and like adjusting when necessary. So like self-awareness is key, honestly.
Yeah.
And I don't know, just in general, from a DM perspective, it's about being conscious and asking for feedback, especially after each session, and making sure like, hey, did y'all like it? Like, what parts did you like? What could I do better or whatever, and things like that. And like, you know, I took a note for myself like a couple of sessions ago because we kind of like got cut short in like our downtime actions, and we were going to continue a bit of it because like, you know, I noted that like Alyssa made a mention like, hey, I still had like a thing I wanted to do. And I was like, okay, I didn't give Jack enough time to really get like their stuff out this session. I really want to make sure that I give them as like good scenes next session. And that was just like a personal note that I had for myself whenever like I try to notice those things, and especially like, again, can't recommend it enough, recording your sessions, even if you're never going to release them, just for yourself. Because listening back through, I can see the moments where I'm like, that wasn't as satisfying for Jack as I probably would have wanted it to be, and trying to do better each session for the sake of my players.
And I think like that definitely shows. I think too, like as I know we talk a lot about like our position is a very fortunate one because like our friendships are all strong. We all have very good communication. Like it's very open as far as like you can ask for feedback and like we will give it or we will communicate something if we feel like it needs to be communicated. And I mean, yeah, certainly like we as DMs both have a tendency to like overanalyze things. Like things may not really be a problem. Yeah. But like we will like be like, oh my, like in that anticipatory not wanting to.
Yeah, like I might be saying this and Alyssa's like, girl, I've been having a great time. What are you talking about?
Right, exactly.
But it's just me like being so hyper-conscious.
And I have the same thing. And it's like, especially I have the same thing, a similar thing with VTM because that campaign, we've only played a handful of sessions of like, we aren't as settled into our characters as we are in Strixhaven. And I mean, certainly like there is no utility in comparing yourself to anyone else, but like I do it because my brain, of course I do, right? And so like I try to, and I mean, we're all people who are very comfortable and enjoy role playing. And so I think it like, but I still will get hyper conscious about like, did everyone seem to have the same impact? Are things divided fairly? Am I like, if there is just because I have a better idea of who someone is, or I feel a little bit more like famously don't really prep for my session. So there's some things where like I feel pretty comfortable in certain NPC's skin and others that are kind of new or like they get made up in the moment. And so I'm like, oh, well, like, am I doing a good enough job in shepherding that where I'm giving enough for people to play off of? If like it's a newer NPC or it's someone that I don't have as much or much of was clear of an idea of like who they are, what their motivations are, how they're feeling going into a session. But like I also think it would be interesting. I don't really have a clear answer to this, so not that we have to come up with one by any means, but like I think it would be interesting from like a audience perspective of like it's easy to say like, yeah, distribute scenes and all that when all of your players are pretty equally comfortable with roleplay.
Yeah, that's true.
But like, what if the situation isn't that? I mean, it's something like we can open this up. If anyone has any opinions on this or advice or has dealt, like maybe you have a newer player, you have someone who's like more in it for the math rocks and like they're not, or you just have like your partner's party where it's like they had a player that like brought up to him that like they wanted a bit more role play and stuff, but then like presumably other players like aren't as concerned with that, which is super valid. Like how in that I do want to acknowledge that I think the balance gets a bit more complicated or confusing. And I mean, like, I feel like all of our solutions to things boil down to like communication, but it is a lot of I mean, that's just being a human too, I think. But they're like, oh, there's a level of like, well, I guess you just have to talk to people and make sure they're getting what they want out of the campaign. Because like, if it isn't someone that enjoys role play as much, then maybe they don't want as much focus. Yeah. But also maybe. Like that, I don't know. Like it would be interesting to hear from like people who deal with that more directly.
Well, yeah, I think it comes down to like the style of play. Like, yeah, what we find most satisfying at our table is those like role play heavy story development, all of that. But it can also play into games where like the combat is most like important. It can come down to how do you structure your combats? Are you making sure that there's opportunities for your players to shine in the abilities that they've chosen?
That's true.
Or are you being more combative and trying to counter every single thing that they've made this character to do and like not giving them those wins? Or
like if someone took the observant feat, are you like, do you try to not let them use it? Like, oh, you don't read lips. You don't see this.
Yeah, there's something in the way.
It's like, well, no, let them have the cool. Like, they took the feat that lets them read lips. Like, let them read them lips.
Let them cook.
Yeah,
yeah.
That's true too. Of like, I guess like for us, favoritism is very like story beat and scene division. But yeah, in a campaign and like more combat driven campaign, that it would be more of like creating opportunities for everyone to use the cool stuff that they have. Or like if you're developing items or something, give people like making sure like everyone's getting something cool.
And not just like not just giving one item that's like very clearly for
you
one
homebrew
individual.
Special something for someone and then someone else is like, yeah, you can have a +2 sword.
Yeah.
Like, that just hits a little different.
You go, little Timmy. Buy yourself something nice.
Yeah, that's very true. Yeah, I'm not a combat DM, as like anyone who listens that should really know. There's a reason I play VTM where we have a lovely roll called 3 rounds and out where we just
I genuinely like it's not just that I want more combat. It's like I want us to have combat like sporadically throughout our story. But it's combat for a reason. I want it to be
narratively impactful.
It's narratively impactful. I want it to be moments where you can flex what you've built this character to do. And I want to give you opportunities to use the cool shit you have. So, because it is a balance, and I want to make sure that you're getting all the bits. I know that y'all love the RP, but I want it to also include the parts that
Yeah, and we still enjoy combat. I think we enjoy the combat as much as we do. Or I know I'll speak for myself. Like, I enjoy the combat that we do as much as I enjoy it because it feels impactful. Because like we don't do combat all the time, so it feels like something fresh and interesting to do. And it's like, oh yeah, this is a fun aspect of my character that I can use because I play a paladin, and paladins can do a boohoo damage. But like for me personally, I'm less interested in that being the primary thing that I do. And that's just my preference. Plenty of people are the opposite, and that's equally valid. But yeah, it's a good, like, when combat pops off, it feels like it's popping off for a reason and not just because, like, oh, well, we have to have combat every session.
We walked into the tall grass for 2 seconds too long, and now we're in a fight.
The big anaconda came. Like, yeah, it's just, it's not just like a default, like you're checking a box as the DM of like, okay, ran the encounter for today.
Yeah.
And like it goes back to that, like co-creating the story and finding moments where it makes sense.
Yeah. And at the end of the day, it's understanding why your players are coming to your table. Yeah. What do they want to experience? How do you prioritize that? How do you make it fair to everybody and making sure that, you know, nobody's getting too much of an advantage over other people, and make it rewarding and valid for them. We're coming to the end of our episode, but in general, the notes: communicate with your players. Communicate.
Exercise awareness.
Exercise self-awareness, especially.
Players also communicate with your DM because, like, it is a two-way street and this is a collaborative experience, and DMs are not, you know, I'm having a thing where, like, I have one of those days where I try to think of a word and then my brain shuts off and I blue screen.
That's fair.
DMs are not omniscient. There we go.
You got it.
I have a pretty extended vocabulary. Sometimes my brain just locks me out of it. And you know, they're not oracles. They can't, like, inherently. They're not always gonna know. No one's perfect. So communicate, and then, you know, if you try to communicate and it doesn't go well, then yeah, that's a different problem.
Yeah, maybe that's a sign to make some other decisions.
Refer
about your
to
life.
Like the second or third episode we were published. But
yeah, be self-aware, be receptive.
Yes.
Because especially if you don't see something happening at the table, just because of your perspective as the GM, because your mind is clearly going to be on 50 million other things.
You have a lot to think about. Yeah, and there are plenty of things, like, as the GM, like, you want, like, agonize over. Yeah. And there was like, well, what do you mean? That was great. And it's like, no, but I'm comparing it to the idea I had in my brain. And it didn't hit the same.
It didn't hit.
And it's like, well, your players didn't see that. So they don't have that. So there's plenty of things to, like, wring your hands over as the DM or GM. But it is just like that generally. Yeah. Prioritizing that list and then being aware and then being open and receptive when people suggest things or communicate things.
And even if, like, for example, like, again, it doesn't have to be malicious or intentful, but if you do notice something or like unbalanced in the dynamics of your game, address it and just try to do better next time, and don't beat yourself too much about it.
Absolutely.
But thank you so much for joining us for this little chat. We'll see you next time. Bye. Table Talk is a podcast brought to you by Mythos Media Productions, bringing you a new episode every Wednesday, wherever you get your podcast. Find us on Instagram and TikTok at TableTalkRPG, or check us out at our website, mythosmediaproductions.godaddyscites.com. All business inquiries can reach out to us via email at info@mythosmediaproductions.com.